positively. Right, so we're going to move on to the statement on Exxon Mobil on Mossmorran. Statement, Chris MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With your permission, I wish to make a statement on the closure of the Exxon Mobil Fife ethylene plant at Mossmorran in Scotland. And I would like to thank particularly Madam Deputy Speaker, Mr Speaker, for accommodating this statement today. Like many members of this House, I am saddened to learn of Exxon's plans to close their Fife ethylene plant. This decision is, of course, extremely worrying news for those employed by Exxon, as well as contractors who work at the plant, those employed by the companies who supply the site with gas, and those at the adjacent natural gas liquids plant, which is operated by Shell. Whilst this is no solace to those impacted at Exxon, Shell have confirmed that they do not see their workforce or operations affected by this closure. The Government and Exxon Mobil have been discussing the operating environment around the plant since April, with my officials endeavouring to meet Exxon every week since August. Government ministers also met with Exxon regularly this year, underlining our commitment to exploring every possible opportunity to retain the site's operations. This afternoon, I spoke with Paul Greenwood, the chair of Exxon Mobil. He assured me that Exxon are not suggesting that this closure was due to a lack of action or will on behalf of the government. It was a commercial decision made when the numbers simply did not add up. He reiterated to me that the site is 40 years old, inefficient and in dire need of modernisation to be commercially viable for the future. The company estimates that it would have cost close to $1 billion of capital investment to bring the site to a point where it would be profitable. When combined with a challenging petrochemicals market, including a sharp decline in ethane supply in the North Sea, the investment was likely to outweigh the return. Exxon Mobil has already closed similar assets in Europe and is divesting from activities where there is no short-term path to profitability. Despite exploring alternative use cases for the site, none offered a viable route to sustainable operations. As the site has been significantly loss-making for the last 5 years, and with the investment potentially taking a further 5 years before it would reach its potential, Exxon decided against continuing operations. And in those circumstances, the support from government that Exxon needed to change those calculations was beyond acceptable levels. Exxon were aware of this, and they have acknowledged that, even with support, the commercial circumstances were simply too stark and the costs would have been too great. So despite tireless, inventive and determined work from both government officials and Exxon, the challenges facing the site were ultimately insurmountable. The decision for government not to provide financial or bespoke policy support was communicated to Exxon by my right honourable friend, the Business and Trade Secretary, but we have, of course, retained an open dialogue with the company throughout. This is not a decision that either the company or the government have taken lightly, because, as honourable members know, this government has shown that it is prepared to step in and support industry when it is feasible to do so. We have stepped in to support business in the steel, shipbuilding and chemicals industries, protecting jobs and vital capability across the UK, including in Scotland. But in all cases, there was a fundamentally sound business proposition underpinning our investment, and sadly here, this was not the case. I also want to stress, Madam Deputy Speaker, that as disappointing and concerning as the closure of the Mossmorran site is, it is not symptomatic of a UK industry as a whole. Our commitment to support UK industry is clear in the many steps that we have taken since coming to government last year. Our modern industrial strategy lays out a raft of policy interventions to ensure that British industry remains a world leader that is hugely innovative and investable. A strategy to cut red tape, lower energy bills and get spades in the ground. And the fact that we've seen £250 billion of investment committed and over 45,000 jobs supported since July is testament to that strategy's success so far. The closure of the Fife plant is a commercial decision made by Exxon Mobil, but of course it has a very human cost. There are 179 direct employees and 250 contractors employed, with more in the supply chain, and I know members across the House will be primarily worried about these individuals and the communities impacted. Let me assure the House that the Government stands ready to provide support through the Department for Work and Pensions Rapid Response Service and their involvement in PACE. The Secretary of State is meeting with Unite tomorrow as part of a wider visit, where he will discuss options for more support for the affected employees. I also met with Unite earlier today, and I will meet with GMB colleagues tomorrow. I've been assured by the company directly that Exxon, as a responsible employer, will ensure they properly support their staff finding alternative work, including at their Foley site at Southampton, and to support those employees in their relocation. Our focus now is on helping the workforce through this troubling period and ensure responsible next steps are taken for the decommissioning and remediation of the site. Long term, we are ensuring that UK manufacturing at large benefits from this government's growth mission. We want to create the right conditions for British manufacturers to properly compete and win in the global economy. And over the coming days, my department will update the House on the progress we're making in support of that effort, not least on energy costs. Before I conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, Exxon Chair Paul Greenwood asked me to reiterate a message that he has given to all of the employees at Mossmorran. It's a message I'm sure all members of the House will agree with. The closure of this site is no reflection on them, their efforts or their work. They should be proud of what they have accomplished in the last 40 years. And I would like, as Industry Minister, to personally thank the employees at Mossmorran and the Fife community for their contribution to the UK industrial economy and, through decades of ethylene exports, our balance of trade for over 40 years. This is not the end of Fife's industrial story. And as Exxon gradually decommissions and remediates the site, we as a government are committed to working with the local authority and the Scottish Government to promote the benefits of this location for future industrial investment. This government is committed to supporting the workforce and the community over the coming weeks and months during what I know will be a difficult and painful transition. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Government for advance sight of their statement. Since this Government came to power in July 2024, over 15,000 manufacturing and industry jobs have been lost. Only this Labour government would recognise that as a success. The Minister says he is saddened. Madam Deputy Speaker, that is cold comfort to the workers losing their jobs today. Energy-intensive industries are in decline across the United Kingdom. Oil refineries and petrochemicals plants are facing the economic and fiscal realities of choices made by this Labour government. At Ineos in Grangemouth, at Prax Lindsay in Lincolnshire, and now at Mossmorran and Fife, where Exxon have told us that there is no competitive future due to the current economic and policy environment. The Minister tells us that this was a commercial decision and the numbers did not add up. Due to Labour's decisions. Honestly, he mentions the decline in the ethane supply in the North Sea. The Minister almost gets it. This government's destructive tax and ban policy in the North Sea has led to disinvestment and has undermined the petrochemicals industry and ability to secure low-cost ethane, damaging our energy security, detrimental to our petrochemicals industry and utterly devastating for Scottish oil and gas workers. The Labour Party simply doesn't get it. And the carbon tax, Madam Deputy Speaker, £20 million per annum for the Fife ethylene plant alone was crippling. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are suffocating industry in this country, and these are political choices. Industrial emissions are mobile. If we are decreasing our domestic carbon emissions by crushing British industry, we are simply exporting our climate obligations and increasing reliance on imports for plastics, fuel, ceramics, glass, bricks, concrete and more. We must find a way to decarbonise without decimating our domestic industrial base. Simply forcing industry abroad does nothing to reduce global emissions. In fact, it does the opposite. The high cost of energy and this government's war on the North Sea is killing industry in this country. We simply cannot afford this Labour government. Though it is in Fife where the closure will be felt most acutely, the repercussion will reverberate across this country. For the first time since the UK invented polyethylene, we will not be manufacturing the primary component in this country. That is shameful. Industry has already warned that closures like Grangemouth, Prax, Lindsay and now Mossmorran risk forcing downstream operators to import resources at higher cost, undermining their competitiveness. It is not just 400 jobs at Mossmorran. This impact will cascade across the supply chain. This domino effect is taking place already. Altrad, Bilfinger, Kafer all announced redundancies at Mossmorran when Grangemouth closed earlier this year. Allowing another major industrial plant to close sends a signal to investors that under this government, UK PLC is closed for business. We are losing domestic industrial capacity at a terrifying rate. The Minister claims this is not symptomatic of British industry as a whole, but the drumbeat of job losses and plant closures tells a very different story. He talks of support for jobs, but unemployment has risen every single month since this Labour Party took office. The closure will be felt by workers in Fife, but make no mistake, the crisis-facing industry is stamped made in Whitehall. The government has said in the House that they are ready to provide assistance to workers at Mossmorran, and yet we still lack clarity on the support for the future of Grangemouth and the status of the National Wealth Fund monies promised by the Prime Minister. Would the Minister update us on the £200 million fund for the future of Grangemouth, because they have not seen one penny spent so far. The Prime Minister's promise looks like empty words yet again. What proposals have been brought forward, and can the Minister confirm when workers will have certainty on the future of the site? This government is taxing jobs, increasing the cost of energy and driving British industry off a cliff edge. Britain cannot afford this Labour government. Frankly, Scotland cannot afford this Labour government. And I feel very sorry for the Scottish Labour MPs that have been whipped in to defend this government's position tonight. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not a just transition. It is anything but a just transition. This is the willful deindustrialisation of the United Kingdom. They are offshoring carbon emissions and driving up reliance on imports, and British workers are paying the price. So can I ask the Minister to outline the support his department intends to provide to workers at Mossmorran, and to provide an update on the National Wealth Fund monies for Grangemouth? Can I also ask the Minister whether he agrees that British industry is at a competitive disadvantage due to the crippling energy industrial costs, the job tax and the carbon tax? And will this government finally see sense and see what everybody else sees and change their policies on the North Sea?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd be very happy to take the opportunity to educate the Shadow Secretary about some of the issues. No, it's real, and he will soon be able to realise that. I was particularly upset, actually. I was genuinely upset when he described my words as cold words. They weren't cold. They were sincere and heartfelt. And the reason for that is because I've been in this position myself. I really wish that he and his colleagues had showed similar vigour when the steel industry in Teesside was collapsing around us, when I and my colleagues were at risk of redundancy, and they stood by and left 10 days to find a new buyer for the most efficient steel plant in the country to close. And I really take his comments with a pinch of salt, because he talks about the uncompetitive business environment in the UK. This plant has been significantly loss-making for 5 years. I wonder why that is. Could it be because of the high levels of energy prices that we have as a result of the previous government's decision to tie us to international gas prices, to put us at the mercy of Vladimir Putin? We talk about a transition. He talks about the transition. I know what a terrible transition is like. I lived through that in the coalfield of County Durham. What I am ensuring, what this government is ensuring, is that the workforce in the UK, in Scotland and throughout the UK in these industries have the benefit of a proper transition. That's why we have an industrial strategy. That's why we have intervened in industry in the areas that I said. And now we come to the point of education. It's best sometimes not to take your knowledge of industry or industry in Scotland from Twitter, because in fact we do still have ethylene production in the UK. It's at Grangemouth. I would have thought he would have realised that. So the UK isn't without ethylene production. And actually, maybe he didn't realise, none of the ethylene produced at Mossmorran was used in the UK anyway. It was exported, 100% of it, to the EU. That was why I made the point, thanking the workers locally about their contribution to the balance of trade that we've had in the UK over so many decades. It was all exported. And finally, his point about carbon taxes. And you can debate the nuances of carbon taxes if you want to, but this plant exports all of its product to the EU. So to export it to the EU, it needs to ensure that it aligns with its market, the market in which it is, which obviously has the EU emissions trading system. If it received relief in the UK, it would have to pay that tax to the EU. Does he prefer that money comes to the UK government, or does he prefer it goes to the EU? Really, what his comments demonstrated is he not only does not understand this plant, he doesn't understand the chemicals industry, and I really wonder whether he cares for the workers at Mossmorran at all.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is devastating news for all of the workers at the Exxon Mobil Fife ethylene plant in Mossmorran, many of whom are my constituents. Exxon Mobil must now be fully transparent and give proper clarity for the sake of all those affected. This is a company that made £25 billion in profits last year. The truth is that over the course of multiple meetings with government ministers in recent months, the company failed to come up with any viable proposals to secure the plant and the jobs there. In contrast, I have today met with Shell, who run the adjacent Fife NGL plant, and they have confirmed that the jobs there are secure for the foreseeable future. I'm in regular contact with trade union colleagues, and let me ask, earlier today both Fife Council and I called for a new task force to be set up to explore future options for the plant and provide proper support to the workforce. Will the UK Government give full support and engagement to such a task force?
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for her question, and I believe she's absolutely right that what we need to do is focus on the workforce here. Earlier today, I sought and was given reassurances by the company in terms of the support that they will give to the workforce. Of the 179 permanent employees, their expectation is that 50 of those employees will remain in employment until at least 27-28 to support the safe decommissioning of the plant, and a further 50 will be offered relocation to their Forley plant. I've also made inquiries about apprentices as well. The specific request that she has about a task force would be usual in this situation. I absolutely support it, and I do think a new and distinctive task force is required from this plant to address the very specific areas, not only for this plant, but for the Fife community.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Susan Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As is already, I would like to agree that this announcement is devastating for Mossmorran and for the communities around Fife. Hundreds of highly skilled workers now face an uncertain future, and it's clear that the closure of this cornerstone facility reflects a deeper failure to provide the stable, long-term industrial environment that businesses need if they are to invest and grow in Scotland. For many years, the Liberal Democrats have warned that the absence of a coherent industrial strategy, first abandoned by the previous Conservative government, and then left to further drift by this Labour government, has created damaging uncertainty for our manufacturing and energy sectors. Will the Minister assure this House that the energy sector is at the heart of the government's industrial strategy? Exxon's statement made clear that the current economic and policy environment has made continued operations uncompetitive. So what steps will the government take to ensure that the UK remains a viable place for energy production and to prevent further closures of major industrial sites? We also cannot ignore the human impact. Many of these workers are among the most experienced and specialised in the sector, yet only 50 roles are being offered elsewhere, and that nearly 500 miles away. Can the Minister tell the House how many have actually been offered and accepted relocation, and what support has been put in place locally for those who simply cannot uproot their lives, families and communities? Further, the Exxon closure will see many highly qualified and specialised workers laid off at a time of severe cost of living pressures. So what immediate and long-term measures is the government putting in place to ensure that these individuals can transition into appropriate, well-paid employment? Communities in Fife deserve clarity, certainty and a real plan for the future. I urge the Minister to act quickly, decisively and collaboratively to protect these workers and to ensure that Scotland's industrial base has a sustainable future.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I agree with the Honourable Member that really at the crux of this has been a failure of long-term planning around industry. And actually you can see that if you contrast the two ethylene plants in Scotland. So the plant at Grangemouth imports a lot of its ethylene from the US, which is in plentiful supply and also at a much lower cost. And that required a significant investment in the port infrastructure at that plant. Exxon Mobil were aware that in order to ensure that Mossmorran was sustainable, they would also need to make a similar investment. And it would have been possible for them to make that investment some years ago, but now at this stage, an investment of about £1 billion that won't come to fruition within the next 5 years is simply, judged by the company, not to be sustainable. And of course, businesses require some certainty in order to invest. I made that point at Energy Questions this morning, and it's the certainty provided by our industrial strategy, and particularly this government's commitment to renewable energy technologies, that is allowing that investment to come in. I agree with her. Our focus absolutely needs to be on the employees. I understand that no employees have been offered relocation yet, but it is the company's view that 50 such posts are available, and they are inviting expressions of interest from employees at this stage. And I do understand it is a very long way away, actually, and that relocation won't be suitable for everyone, perhaps people who don't want to uproot their families and so on, or who are embedded in their local communities. But if it is an opportunity that some workers would want to take up, then I'm pleased that it is there. With the offer of the 50 employees for relocation, 50 employees to be retained, we have about 60% of employees, of the permanent employees, who at the moment we can see a way forward for. But for the other 40%, clearly that's where I'd expect the task force will provide support, the UK Government working with the Scottish Government and the local authority on that. And we also must not ignore the jobs that are being created every day and every week in Scotland in our new clean energy industries, up to 60,000 jobs by 2030. And it's fundamentally about supporting that transition. So it is my expectation that as these new jobs are created, people will transition across. And I've said I've lived through a terrible transition in the past. The mission of this government is to ensure we have a supportive transition for workers and communities in Scotland and around the UK. Thank you.
Richard Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This decision by Exxon Mobil and the manner in which it has been taken and announced is a very poor way to treat workers who have given so much to this company and their communities. And given that only last year the company was announcing 4-year apprenticeships at Mossmorran, including some of my constituents, will the Minister do everything in his power to ensure that these apprenticeships can continue and that the company, who have made record profits in recent years, will recognise their duty of care to these young people?
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for the question. I was very pleased to meet with him earlier to discuss some of these issues in detail. I'm very pleased that he's raised the issues of apprentices. I raised this myself personally with the chairman of the company earlier today. I've established that there are approximately 6 apprentices. It would be usual in this situation for those apprentices to be found positions in local industry. Certainly that will be a priority, and really with only 6 apprentices, I don't think it will be a problem. Local industry does tend to respond very rapidly to that, and of course it is a priority for us to ensure that these apprentices can continue their apprenticeship.
Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Exxon have said that the closure reflects the challenges of operating in a policy environment that is accelerating the exit of vital industries, domestic manufacturing and high-value jobs they provide. When is the government going to take responsibility for the decisions that they are making, which are seeing us with energy prices with no prospect of reducing, ethane from the North Sea reducing at a huge amount of rate, which is leading to these job losses and will continue to lead to more and more job losses across Scotland, as the Minister knows, until policy decisions are changed and until the North Sea is supported?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I am aware that that's what was reported in the press, but I actually spoke to the chairman of Exxon. I spoke to the chairman of Exxon earlier, and I asked him specifically if he could confirm that. And what he said to me is actually there were a few issues, including the feedstock availability and cost, and the efficiency of the plant. He also said that without the $1 billion investment stated, he couldn't see that there was a future for the plant in those circumstances.
Graham Downey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Minister for his statement, as well as to my honourable friend, the Member for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, for exposing the frankly ridiculous lack of transparency we've seen from Exxon Mobil. And certainly my constituents will know very clearly exactly where the blame for today's announcement lies, and it is with Exxon Mobil. I would like to bring one particular issue to the Minister's attention. A constituent has got in touch with me this afternoon. I have a number of workers who work at Mossmorran as well, worried about the effect on opportunities for young people in the area. And after we have also seen the SNP's shocking failure on skills, including cutting college budgets by up to 20%, can the Minister reassure me that he will do everything he can to work with the Scottish Government, Fife College and others to make sure that skills in the area are maintained and we make sure young people have the opportunities that they deserve in Fife?
I thank my honourable friend. I too was particularly disappointed that this announcement was made so close to Christmas. I think that's something that anyone making announcements such as this should take into account. He raises the opportunities for young people. He's absolutely right to do that. Our Clean Energy Jobs Plan was launched just a couple of weeks ago, and we highlighted in there the opportunity to create 5 new regional centres of excellence for clean energy jobs. I know that there will be great demand for the skills of young people in Fife and across Scotland and across the UK in these clean energy industries. We've set out the jobs and the skills and the methodology by which we will enable people to access those, and the Prime Minister was very clear about this in his speech to Labour Party conference. Opportunity for young people is a mission of this government, and ensuring that those young people can access high quality jobs in the clean energy industries in Fife needs to be a priority for the task force too.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Unfortunately for the Minister, some of us have also spoken to Mr Greenwood today, and whilst the Minister is arguing that this has nothing to do with their policy in respect of the North Sea, that was certainly not what was conveyed to me, which I'm sure the Minister will clarify from the dispatch box. But before he does, he's also said that Exxon are not suggesting that this closure was due to a lack of action or will on behalf of the government. Exxon's statement, meanwhile, says that it's down to the UK's current economic and policy environment combined with market conditions. So what we have tonight is 400 families knowing that they don't have certainty over their ability to pay their bills going forward. A whole community impacted as a result of this decision, and a UK government minister who is not being clear with them about the reasons, 1, why this has happened, and 2, why he is not helping them, because he has stated from that dispatch box just a moment ago that they have chose to intervene. We know that they've chosen to intervene in Scunthorpe, but they chose again not to do so in Grangemouth, as members opposite will recall, and he is choosing not to do so now in Mossmorran. They are sleepwalking into the deindustrialisation of Scotland. This is on them.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Maybe it would be helpful if I just reiterated the direct quote from the Chair of Exxon when he said that the closure was not due to a lack of action or will on behalf of the government. Not due to a lack of action or will on behalf of the government. And he was quite clear about the condition of this plant. And I also said in my opening remarks that where government has intervened in the past, it has been where there's been a fundamentally sound business proposition. And I'm sure that the honourable member would be... He probably failed to mention it because maybe he'd forgotten the £200 million commitment that government has made to Grangemouth, the 100 projects that are lining up behind that in order to support the people in Grangemouth. And obviously he didn't want to welcome that. He talks about a strategy for industry. Well, I haven't seen the SNP industrial strategy. Perhaps I missed it.
Talk Crichton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for his statement and pay tribute to his work and the work of my honourable friend for Cowdenbeath and Kilcoddy in trying to engage Exxon Mobil for the last couple of months, for trying to speak to them regularly and yet failing to extract any viable proposal from the company for a way forward. Sharon Graham, leader of Unite, has described Exxon Mobil's decision to pull out as a disgrace. It's a £25 billion company that is walking away from 179 jobs and 250 more contractors. And can the Minister make sure that when he sets up this task force, and despite the axe grinding we hear all the time from the other side, that he will work with the Scottish Government and with Fife Council and with the community to ensure a future for these workers?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank my honourable friend for the question. I spoke to Unite representatives today and heard directly from the workforce of their experiences too. The Exxon Mobil did try, prior to announcing the closure of the plant, to effect a sale of the plant, and they weren't able to find any interest. I've been informed this afternoon that as a result of the announcement of the closure, there may be some interest in the plant, and of course we will explore every possible avenue for that and to ensure that the employees receive their support. But if there are companies that are interested, then working with the Scottish Government and the local council, we'd be very happy to explore that.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd agree with the Honourable Member for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy. This is devastating news for Fife, and although the Mossmorran plant is not in my constituency, I know that I will have constituents affected. I do note what was said in the Minister's statement in terms of a lack of action or will on behalf of the Government, but I would suggest that that statement is pretty silent on the economic circumstances which was made in the public statement, and certainly in terms of what I saw when this was immediately announced, there was an attribution to the UK Government's failures in this regard. But the other thing I have to say is I'm a bit disappointed that the first mention in the statement of the Scottish Government was at the very end of the statement and looking forward. The Scottish Government does have a responsibility for economy and jobs, and I would suggest that taking an approach that does not involve the Scottish Government allows the SNP Government to blame the UK Government when such things happen. So although we've not had a surprise, it's not been a surprise to the Government today's announcement, can the Minister outline what conversations were being had with the Scottish Government in advance of today's announcement?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yes, and I thank her for her question. And she points out that this isn't in her constituency, but clearly the effects run far wider than the individual constituency, particularly for a plant of this size. And so we need to think, I think, carefully about the impact of the supply chain on this as well. I apologise for the fact that the Scottish Government is mentioned towards the end of the speech. That is in no way intended to imply that the Scottish Government have not been involved in this or are not involved in this. I know that there have been meetings at the highest level in the Scottish Government, and in fact the Scotland Secretary has also been involved in these discussions with Exxon Mobil as well, as we have tried to find any possible measure in order to avoid this decision. But ultimately it was a decision for the business, and our focus now is on how we can move forward for the workforce and for the future of Fife as well. As I said, the industrial story of Fife is not over. There is excellent opportunity there to bring new investment to that site in the future, and that sort of industrial regeneration is exactly what I want to see.
Chair of the Scottish Affairs Committee, Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement this evening and share the concern of colleagues, particularly those based in Fife, about the effect this closure will have. But the news that contract workers were locked out of the plant this morning is a major concern, as is the news that people, many of whom have worked in the company for many decades, have not yet been given information about what redundancy packages may be available, is very worrying too. So can I ask the Minister what engagement he is having with trade unions on this troubling development, and whether he believes that the trade unions have been properly consulted as they should be in a situation such as this?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thank her for raising these two issues. On the issue of redundancy packages, I raised that earlier with the company, and they assured me that such packages had been made available. I then raised the same question with Unite the Union, and they've undertaken to go away and confirm that for me. I want to do my own due diligence and make sure that that is true. I'm particularly pleased she's raised the issue of contract workers, because it was reported that they were locked out of the site, but the actual situation is slightly more complex than that. So contract workers had their permits revoked this morning, which sounds rather dramatic, I realise, but for a coma site that's a normal procedure in certain circumstances. In fact, the workers themselves believed it was due to weather conditions this morning. It was actually to ensure that all workers on the site, either direct employees or contract workers through their contract managers, could be briefed at the same time on the issue. Contract workers were then allowed to return home or to resume work, recognising that not all of them would have wanted to stay on the site at that time, having received such shocking news. So hopefully that helps to explain that situation, and of course I will ensure that I continue to ask these questions of the company and engage very closely with both Unite and GMB on these issues.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the Business and Trade Committee, we hear all the time that energy costs in this country are unaffordable, and it puts industry of every kind at a disadvantage. We're seeing the results of that here today. The other issue, I think, is the perverse carbon border adjustment mechanism, which actually makes imports of ethylene cheaper, and the Minister referred to imports there. Is it not the case that we need to look at all these policies in the round? We are crippling British industry with this.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I am committed to looking at the entire business environment for our energy-intensive industries, our heavy industry, because I want to improve the competitiveness of that. And perhaps I have an ally across the House who might help to point out areas that we could look at, and I would certainly welcome that in the future. On the two issues that he's raised about energy costs and CBAM, though, I can perhaps provide a little bit more detail. So on energy costs, on electricity costs rather, which aren't the major factor here for this site, the government's introduced a range of measures to try and support improving the cost competitiveness of the UK versus Europe, and we could talk about those in more detail clearly at some other point. On gas, the UK is competitive with Europe, certainly cheaper than Germany and the Czech Republic, slightly more expensive than Italy and Spain. But the issue here fundamentally is the gas costs in the USA, which is considerably cheaper, and we all understand the reason why that is. The CBAM issue is a bit more complex because 100% of the material goes into the EU, so there's an issue around EU market alignment there, which again we could talk through in more detail, but it means it's not quite as straightforward as if a domestic producer was asking for some relief in terms of those measures. But thank you.
Brian Leishman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, sadly it's an all too familiar story. Private capital closing industry, leaving workers as disposable commodities to be tossed aside, and a community devastated. A carbon copy of what happened with Ineos, PetroChina and the Grangemouth oil refinery. Now, the government stepped in at Scunthorpe but did not at Grangemouth, and it looks like it won't at Mossmorran. Why not? Because Scotland is once again the victim of chronic deindustrialisation. For the sake of Scottish workers, Scottish communities, let's get the £200 million spent. Let's get Project Willow going. Let's get new companies in. Let's get the good paying jobs that my community and my town desperately need. And for goodness sake, let's have a bit of common sense and take some form of government ownership in what comes next at Grangemouth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wholeheartedly reject the implication of some sort of anti-Scottish bias in this government. I mean, I stand here as a MacDonald flanked by 3 Scottish ministers. We all think very keenly about these issues in Scotland. And actually, the fundamental point, so he made the point about British Steel at Scunthorpe. I did mention the steel industry, the shipbuilding industry and other aspects of the chemicals industry in my opening statement. And the fundamental point was about having a sound business proposition. In this case, there was not a sound business proposition. The amount of money that was being asked for by the company and the fundamental lack of profitability of the business over such a long period of time meant that it wasn't a viable opportunity. And that's why we need to look forward to how the workforce in Fife and elsewhere can transition into our new green economy. Thank you.
Dave Dugan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister himself draws attention to the 5 Scottish ministers on that Labour government front bench, not one of whom has said anything about this crisis facing 400 families making a living from Mossmorran. The Minister seeks to hide behind the company's statement that there was no lack of enthusiasm by the government to find a solution. But that's not the point. The point is what's led the business to get into this situation in the first place, which is a direct consequence of Labour government policy. And for the hard of thinking, that is the carbon tax at 20 million for Mossmorran alone, the cost of UK energy, which Labour can't fix, the supply of ethane feedstock from the North Sea, the energy profits levy, which this government backs, this government signalling an artificially accelerated decline in the North Sea, and of course the national insurance raid on employers taxing every job across the United Kingdom. This is industrial illiteracy and regulatory incompetence writ large. What does the Minister say to that?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thank you for his question. It's a shame that he didn't attend energy questions this morning, because if he had, he would have heard my colleague, the Energy Minister, express exactly those concerns for the community around Mossmorran. I also think it's slightly bizarre that he would say that this is a result of Labour government policy. The plant's been loss-making for 5 years, so unless he thinks the Labour government have invented a time machine, then clearly it isn't our responsibility. But what I was most startled at was the implication that it is now SNP policy to abolish the ETS. Is that the case?
Chris Kane.
Speaker, doesn't this decision just underline the urgent need for a robust industrial strategy in Scotland that protects jobs, that strengthens the supply chain and ensures that our manufacturing base is fit for the future?
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend is absolutely right. In our industrial strategy, we point to the 8 growth sectors, including clean energy and defence, all areas in which Scotland is incredibly strong and, of course, underpinned by our foundational industries as well. Our industry in Scotland, in England, in Wales and in Northern Ireland is a great strength of the UK, and one that for the first time in a generation is receiving a significant amount of attention from government.
Dr Andrew Murison.
Clear that this is the result of the economic and policy environment that it found itself in. It's as plain as a pikestaff. Now, the Minister said that he has been in discussion with Exxon, including today, when presumably he discussed what it meant by policy. Can he please say clearly what policy issues Exxon has had that has led to this decision?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Actually, the company was quite clear to me that this is a commercial decision. This is a commercial decision that is based on investment and a lack of performance of the plant. If the company had wished the plant to be able to compete, it would have made the decision that was made at Grangemouth. It would have created a pull for the importation of the raw material. It didn't do that, and it judges that that is an investment in which it will not generate sufficient return.
Dr Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I grew up just 4 or 5 miles away from this plant, and I have to say it's an area which is still recovering from Thatcher's economic vandalism. So I do thank the Minister for both his statement this evening and the work he's done over many months, and I also have to thank my honourable friend, the member for Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, for her work as well. She stands in solidarity with these workers, and we should stand in solidarity with her, no matter which party we are from. Madam Deputy Speaker, on the 1st of September, we learned it had been almost a year since any minister from the Scottish Government had contacted the management team at Mossmorran. Almost a year. It had been 4 years since any minister from the Scottish Government had contacted SEPA or the Health and Safety Executive about the management of the site. On July 29th this year, we learned that the Scottish Government was asked when it last proactively contacted the UK Government about the operation of the Mossmorran site. They could not name a date going back to 2020. There was no evidence of any proactive engagement. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've heard bluster from the SNP this evening. Have the Scottish Government approached the Minister with any kind of coherent plan to support these workers or save the plant?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think what my honourable friend identifies is the different approach under this government, a government that has an active industrial policy that works in partnership with industry, in the same way that I saw when I worked in industry that other European governments did. And his sorry tale about the lack of involvement from previous Westminster governments and SNP governments in Scotland in terms of engaging with the ownership of this plant, in a very stark contrast to my predecessor in this role and the previous Secretary of State, was also highlighted by my honourable friend, the Energy Minister, today in the refining sector, another sector that we're desperately concerned about. But until this government took action to meet their management, had not had a meeting with a Westminster Government Minister for 13 years.
Kirsty Blackman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are seeing 400 jobs go here. We saw the jobs go at Grangemouth. Is the Minister surprised that people in Aberdeen, people in the north east of Scotland who are arguing for a just transition, that are being promised 60,000 jobs 5 years hence, have got no faith in this Labour government?
Hear, hear. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful for the opportunity that she's given me actually to clarify some words that I said earlier. So I did talk about the 60,000 jobs by 2030. There's actually 23,000 jobs in the industry by 2023, and there are new jobs being created every day, of course, as a result of our investments in renewable clean energy. The challenge that we have, I think, as part of the transition, so sort of beyond 2030, you can see the clean energy industry is really motoring ahead, but it's actually these few years that are a really difficult transition where we need to work together. But what we're seeing is, whereas the jobs in the clean energy industry, as I say, have been created created every day. A situation like Mossmorran, obviously it's a significant number of jobs all at once. And whilst when I said earlier we can see a way forward for 60% of the direct jobs at the site, what's important to me is that we work with the other 40% as well to ensure that they're placed within and get good jobs within the local economy. Thank you.
Frank McNally.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is devastating news for the Kingdom of Fife, and can I pay tribute to my honourable friend for her diligent work today and over a period of time on this issue. Does my honourable friend share my frustration that despite attempts to fully engage with Exxon Mobil over recent months, including multiple ministerial engagement sessions, the government was presented with no viable plan to save the plant by the company, despite, as has been highlighted, £25 billion of profits from Exxon Mobil last year. That's billion. £25 billion of profits. So can he outline what steps he will take, working with colleagues both in Scotland and in other government departments, to ensure that the workforce receives all necessary support through the DWP Rapid Response Service and PACE?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would like to pay tribute to him and him and colleagues for how they have engaged so carefully on this for such a long period of time, and I look forward to working with them in how we can support the workforce. But I think he makes a very important point, really, which alludes to the strategy of the company here. So the company did indeed present the government without a viable investable proposition, and of course the company has also closed a chemicals plant in France, and they've been able to confirm that actually they are reviewing their European assets. And I think that there reaches a point where we have to accept that the company has made its decision. However, even though the company couldn't find a buyer, as I said, I understand some expressions of interest have been made, and we'd be certainly happy to work with anyone who is interested in the plant, and we have vehicles such as the British Business Bank and the National Wealth Fund which stand by to support any viable business proposition in our industrial strategy areas.
Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The closure of the Exxon Mobil plant is bad news for the whole of the UK economy, and it is the direct result of Labour's economic and energy policies. Does the Minister accept that by pushing up taxes and energy prices, his government is making the UK an uncompetitive environment for energy-intensive industries? So will he tell the House what changes of policies he will make to ensure this isn't the first of many such closures?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So, as I pointed out earlier, the business has suffered from a lack of competitiveness for the last 5 years, and that is indeed in part due to the relative lack of competitiveness of UK energy prices. So I think it's important to point out the things that we've done and are doing to address that. So we have the energy-intensive industry support scheme. We have the supercharger scheme as well, which is providing up to 90% relief, and of course the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme as well, which will reduce prices for over 7,000 businesses by £40 per unit of power over that period of time. But of course, with this business, the key energy input was gas, and as I mentioned on gas, we are competitive with Europe. The issue, of course, was the much cheaper gas prices in the US, and the imports that are coming into Europe of ethylene are indeed primarily coming from the United States of America. And it's on that basis, as a business in the UK that is an exporting business, and with the competitive issues of the plant, fundamentally that's why the business does not see a future in the plant.
Gareth Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think any one of us that represents an industrial constituency can't help but feel a slight tinge of sympathy with the Honourable Member for Kirkcaldy this evening. As you know, we've all seen factories and manufacturing facilities in our constituencies closed. And whilst I do accept what the Minister says about the fact that we are competitive on gas price today with Europe, the reality is that the gas price today compared to what it was 3, 4, 5 years ago is significantly higher, and often the products that are being made in these places being made in these places cannot absorb those overheads, which makes us uncompetitive on the world markets. There is something we have to do looking about how we can subsidise those costs here. But on industrial electricity, we are out of step with the rest of the world. We do need those prices to come down. The Minister mentioned the British Industrial Competitive Scheme. That is not going to come online until 2027. He mentioned the Energy Supercharger Scheme. That doesn't include a whole swathes of industry, including ceramics. So is there anything that the Minister can do in the short term in order to ensure that we end up with help today for those sectors that need it, so we can prevent future closures of big manufacturing sites?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I know that my honourable friend is particularly concerned about the ceramic sector, but the comments that he makes could also, of course, read across to other energy-intensive sectors. On the point that he makes about gas, I did say, of course, that the UK's gas prices, once policy costs have been taken into account, are competitive with the rest of Europe. But in the sector that he mentions, of course, many of those imports come from Turkey. And in some other sectors in the chemicals industry, the issue is actually about overcapacity, oversupply, and dumping of products in the UK that have been produced in the Far East. So actually there are quite a number of issues here, and I am continuing to work on all of those issues across the heavy industry sector to ensure that we can improve the business environment as a whole.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Another week, hundreds more jobs slaughtered on the altar of net stupid zero, leading to high energy costs, high policy costs and high taxes, making this business, along with so many others, completely unviable. How many hundreds of thousands of other industrial workers are terrified that they are next? Can the Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, confirm to this House, has any discussions been had or indications or concerns been raised by Exxon Mobil about any other plants or businesses or refineries in the United Kingdom?
Minister MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable member, I know, takes a very keen interest in the carbon prices on industry, and I think it's worth, just for a moment, looking at the particular situation of this plant as it exports all of its product to the EU. So the carbon taxes which this plant pays, it receives about a sort of 50%, I think, slightly higher than 50% carbon allowance for its emissions. And the reason that it doesn't receive a higher level of allowance for that is a reflection of the inefficiency of the plant. So fundamentally, the free allowances are set against a benchmark, and a plant that receives 50% is one that is inefficient. Now, the intention for that, and I know he'll appreciate this with his business background, the intention in that situation is to incentivise the owner of the plant to invest in order to reduce their carbon emissions and then actually be able to sell the carbon credits on the open market and generate further profit for the plant. And that's what we've seen has worked so effectively in the advanced manufacturing sector. For whatever reason, this owner of this plant chose not to invest. And as a result, they've suffered the carbon penalty for that, and the community of Fife have suffered as a result of their decision as well. And we're now in the position where a £1 billion investment can't be sustained. It would be difficult, clearly, as I mentioned earlier, as they're exporting their products, for this company to find any way to exempt itself from carbon policies, because, of course, the EU has a carbon mechanism too, and that's the market into which they sell. And so, fundamentally, that carbon cost has to be paid either here in the UK or to the EU. And I'm sure, as a good supporter of the UK and of Britain, as opposed to the EU, he would certainly prefer that His Majesty's Treasury received any taxation income rather than sending that money to the EU.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could my honourable friend set out what more the government can do to engage with multinational investors to demonstrate that from Rugby to Fife, the UK is an attractive environment for investment under this Labour government?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I set out in my statement, we've managed to attract £250 billion worth of investment. That investment is coming to the UK because the UK has policy certainty around industry with our industrial strategy, and it's delivering jobs across the whole of the country.
Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister earlier referred to the jobs that are coming in the renewables industry. That will be no consolation to the 400 families tonight who do not have that future within their sight. He also rhymed off the policies that the government has to support energy-intensive industries. They didn't help Mossmorran. And the company have cited the policy environment as a cause of their decision. So can he please reassure the House that the Energy Minister and his colleagues will press upon the Chancellor before the budget that perhaps new, more effective policies are needed to support energy-intensive businesses?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable member for the question, and particularly for reminding us all about those families. And she's right. It's not. They are in an extremely difficult position, and whilst it is incumbent on me, I think, to point out some of the opportunities, I don't want that in any way to diminish as I said, the real pain and distress that I know personally those families will be going through. So I've strived to strike a balance on that, and I hope that she feels that I've managed to do that this evening. She mentions particularly some of the policy situation around Mossmorran, but I'll perhaps refer her to the answer I gave just a short while ago, talking about the impact of carbon taxes on Mossmorran arising directly as a result of the inefficiency of the plant, which is a consequence of previous decisions of a failure to invest in the plant in the past, which ultimately means that the plant appears to be in and of itself not commercially viable. But as I said, if there are companies who come forward who think that they could make the plant commercially viable, then clearly we would want to work with such organisations.
C. Gilbert.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement, and I share the concerns that he's raised about the loss of jobs for the families affected and for the community in Fife. Does he also share my concern that it's my understanding that the Deputy First Minister of Scotland refused to take a call from the Secretary of State from Scotland tonight? If that is true, could he please let us know what the actions would be to remedy that situation for the families involved?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think all I'll say is that in a situation like this, I would expect every part of the governance system in the UK, whether it's the Westminster Government, the Scottish Government, local authorities, to act with a single-minded interest in that of the workforce and the communities affected.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today's announcement by Exxon Mobil, a company that made £25 billion of profit last year, will of course be devastating for the workers, their families, the community in and around Mossmorran. And doesn't it just show that Exxon Mobil doesn't give a fig for its workers, it just prioritises profiteering? Does the Minister agree with me that the fossil fuel giants cannot be trusted to protect jobs or the planet? And will he commit to investing new resources to ensure a genuinely just transition in which the voices of workers are central to the debate, so they're not left at the whims of these profiteering fossil fuel giants?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So I would thank her for her question, and I would point her maybe in the direction of our Clean Energy Jobs Plan, where we're setting out how that transition can be effected, and also the £5.8 billion that we've committed to the National Wealth Fund to support investment in new projects. The transition of workforce and communities is very important to me and to this government as well. I would say to her, not all companies are the same. So many different companies operate in different ways. This government is absolutely committed to working with the private sector to achieve this transition, but in a way that is a partnership between government and industry and trade unions, and we are committed to that.
Graham Ledbetter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 400 jobs, direct jobs at Mossmorran, more in the supply chain, hundreds more at Grangemouth, 1,000 a month out of Aberdeen. Those are independently assessed figures and figures that we know from the statement today. As somebody whose father worked at Ravenscraig in the 1980s, I know very well the impact this has on families. And the Minister has talked a lot about the commercial decision-making in this, but commercial decision-making isn't in a vacuum. It is made on the basis of a policy environment and legislative environment that they are operating in. And the Minister is not addressing that key issue that is making a just transition unviable as it currently stands. Will the Minister address those points?
Minister MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to meet another family of a steelworker across across the floor of the House. In fact, Ravenscraig is a plant I never had the opportunity to work on, but I worked with many people who did, and they always spoke very much of the great sense of camaraderie amongst the workforce there. I absolutely refute that this government is not attracting investment. In fact, for Scotland alone, we've seen an £800 million investment in battery storage projects from Copenhagen. Infrastructure partners, the Port of Coventry Firth, £55 million awarded for floating offshore wind. These are the industries of the future, and the industries that people in Scotland will be able to and are, in fact, now working in. I think the real responsibility of government is to ensure that we help people to transition across into these industries, and fundamentally that's the difference between this government and every previous Conservative government, and certainly the last 14 years.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister says that he has no bias and the Government has no bias against the people of Scotland, but they certainly haven't done very well out of this Government. 1,000 jobs a month being lost in the North Sea, and now, of course, this announcement here again today. And he attributes it all to a commercial decision. That commercial decision is made in a hostile economic environment. And he has told us tonight what some of the factors there. First of all, carbon taxes imposed by this government, lack of supply imposed a result of the reduction in North Sea production, and also then the energy prices a result of the reliance and increasing reliance on wind energy. And the common thread through it all is the government's net zero policies. And why can't they be honest with us and just tell us that these net zero policies are robbing the United Kingdom of all its energy intensive industries, and this will not be the last job and loss announcement we'll hear in this House?
Minister MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. He speaks of 1,000 jobs a month lost in the North Sea oil and gas industry. That's not a figure I recognise, so I'd be happy if he would just share the source of that with me. However, I have some figures to trade of my own, if he wishes to know. So we're expecting 800,000 jobs to be created in the clean energy industries. We've attracted £52 billion of private sector investment since July 2024, and a £5 billion per year of gross value added to the UK economy from carbon capture and storage alone by 2050.
Final contribution. Final contribution, Jim Shannon.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and wish him well for his endeavours. I think anybody in this place today would be churlish not to wish him well in his endeavours to try and do better. Except for maybe one or two to my left-hand side, but that's by the way. It is sad to hear of yet another large UK company closure in Mossmorran next year. I've seen and experienced similar stories in Northern Ireland. What springs to mind is always the impact this will have on the workers. Alongside the Scottish Government, can the Minister provide an assurance that Government will do all they can to protect the livelihoods of these workers, indeed all workers who face redundancy as a result of not being able to find solutions to keep plants such as this one open? I think these workers, we all recognise, need help. They need it today. And really, Minister, what can be done to assure them of a future that they can have for their families, for their mortgages, for the debts that they owe?
Minister MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank him for his contribution, which is also always very sincerely and kindly made. And I agree with him that what will be precisely on the minds of the workforce at Mossmorran right now will be how will they manage in the run-up to Christmas. They'll be thinking about whether they'll be able to pay an instalment on their holiday in January. The plant is set for closure for the 16th of February, so there is a bit of time in terms of as I mentioned, the 40% of the workforce that we will need to find alternative employment for. I mentioned in my statement, and I appreciate it can sound quite cold that the DWP are ready to stand by to help, but they are. And combined with the Scottish Government, the local authority and the support from the UK Government in terms of the task force as well. That's the support that we'll give directly to the employees and their families.
That is the end of the statement on Exxon Mobil Mossmorran. Point of order, Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I promise I'm not going to make a habit of this, but on a point of order, I'm a bit worried that the Minister may have inadvertently misled the House, because he said in his conversation earlier on with the Chairman of Exxon Mobil, Paul Greenwood, that they pointed to no policy decisions by this government for them closing the plant. Now, myself and other members also had the opportunity to speak to Paul Greenwood today, and he did give 4 reasons for the closure. The first 2, the market and the cost of running an oil plant, were, he said, not policy decisions, but the third and the fourth certainly were. The third was the carbon tax, which is costing that plant £20 million, and also the sharp decline in ethanol production in the North Sea due to the accelerated downturn due directly to government policy. So I wondered if the Madam Deputy Speaker might give some advice on how the Minister might go about correcting the record.
I am grateful to the honourable member for giving notice of his point of order. The Chair is not responsible for the content nor the quality of the Minister's answers, if only the Chair had such powers. But he has most definitely put his point on the record. I'll allow the front benches to shuffle over as we go on to the next bit of business. So not to wander past the dispatch box yourself in particular. Go back. Thank you so much. If you're exiting, exit appropriately. Petition Cat Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And